In the twilight years of the 19th century, French neurology found itself embroiled in a fervent intellectual clash, a dispute that questioned the very foundations of human consciousness and the power of suggestion. At the epicenter of this controversy stood Alfred Binet, a young and ambitious researcher caught between the imposing figure of his mentor, Jean-Martin Charcot, at the Salpêtrière hospital in Paris, and the burgeoning psychological theories emanating from the rival Nancy school. Binet's with 1893 work, Le Magnétisme animal, serves as a critical turning point, a public reckoning with the limitations of physiological explanations for hypnotic phenomena, and an embrace of the pervasive influence of psychological suggestion. Charcot, a towering figure in French neurology, had established the Salpêtrière as a leading centre for the study of hysteria and hypnosis. His theory of le grand hypnotisme posited that hypnosis was a genuine neurophysiological state, a condition akin to a nervous disease, inducible in predisposed individuals, namely hysterics, through physical means. This theory was built upon meticulous observation of patients exhibiting dramatic physical symptoms, such as paralysis, convulsions, and sensory disturbances. Binet, initially a staunch supporter of Charcot's views, collaborated with Charles Féré on a series of experiments designed to bolster the physiological basis of hypnosis. These early Salpêtrière studies revolved around two key phenomena, the transfer and metallotherapy. The former involved the supposed transference of hysterical paralysis from one side of the body to the other through the application of a magnet. The latter claimed that different metals could evoke specific physical or emotional states in hypnotized individuals. The experimental setup typically involved a hypnotized hysteric patient, often female, to whom a magnet or various metal objects would be applied. Researchers meticulously documented the patient's reactions, meticulously recording the changes in their physical symptoms or emotional expressions. A typical transfer experiment might involve a patient with a paralysis in their right arm. Under hypnosis, a magnet would be applied to the left arm, and supposedly, the paralysis would transfer to the left side as well. Similarly, in metallotherapy, a piece of gold might be applied to the patient's forehead, allegedly inducing feelings of joy, while iron might evoke sadness or aggression. These observations, interpreted through the lens of Charcot's physiological theory, suggested a direct causal link between external physical agents and specific neurological responses. However, the Nancy school, led by Hippolyte Bernheim and Auguste Leibold, challenged this interpretation. They argued that hypnosis was primarily a product of suggestion, a psychological phenomenon rooted in the patient's belief and expectation. They demonstrated that similar phenomena could be induced in ordinary individuals, not solely hysterics, through verbal suggestion alone. This fundamental disagreement between the physiological determinism of the Salpêtrière and the psychological emphasis of the Nancy school sparked a heated debate that consumed the French scientific community. The magnétisme animal emerged directly from this intellectual conflict. Binet and Féré, initially dedicated to reinforcing Charcot's claims, embarked on a critical reassessment of their own earlier experiments. The influence of the Nancy school's critiques became undeniable, compelling Binet to question the validity of the Salpêtrière's core assumptions. The book outlines the initial experimental setup and results. It then states their doubts. Their initial experiments were built upon Charcot's theory of le grand hypnotisme. They designed their experiments to observe the patient's reactions under hypnosis, induced via magnets or exposure to different metals. The results consistently provided the expected outcomes, which supported Charcot's view. Binet and Féré had no reason to question this approach until the Nancy school presented credible counter-arguments, forcing a re-evaluation of their methods and conclusions. Binet began to suspect their experiments were flawed due to subtle cues and expectations. He re-evaluated the conclusions drawn from those metallotherapy treatments. He began to feel that their work was based on flawed assumptions. This led him to break ranks with Charcot and abandon his previous conclusions. The initial conclusions of the Salpêtrière school were based on Charcot's theory, which stated patients with hysteria are predisposed to hypnosis. This approach influenced the experimental design in Binet's work, leading them to confirm that magnets had a particular effect on paralyzed patients. Binet and Féré were initially focused on proving Charcot's theory. However, as they began to doubt the physiological cause, Binet questioned the earlier influence of suggestion. The claims regarding metal treatments inducing particular emotions were based on flawed methods. This complete methodology will be revealed in the next section. In 1893, Alfred Binet, alongside Charles Féré, published Le Magnétisme animal, a work that stands as a pivotal moment in the history of experimental psychology. This book is significant less for its purported subject matter of animal magnetism, and more for its incisive methodological critique of the prevailing theories surrounding hypnosis, particularly those espoused by Jean-Martin Charcot and the Salpêtrière school. Le magnétisme animal represents Binet's intellectual departure from Charcot. It highlights the critical role that suggestion and expectation play in shaping experimental outcomes, a cornerstone of modern scientific methodology. The genesis of Le magnétisme animal lies in the intellectual climate of late 19th century France, where the study of hypnosis and hysteria was dominated by Charcot's neurological approach. Charcot argued that hysteria was a genuine neurological condition with specific, predictable symptoms inducible through hypnosis. A core tenet of Charcot's hypothesis was that only individuals predisposed due to a hysterical constitution were susceptible to hypnotic influence. He believed external physical agents, particularly magnets and various metals, could precipitate specific physical and emotional responses in these susceptible individuals. This led to the development of metallotherapy, the practice of applying metals to the skin to alleviate hysterical symptoms. Binet, initially an enthusiastic proponent of Charcot's theories, began to harbour doubts about the validity of the Salpêtrière's experimental methods. He and Fay-Ray embarked on a systematic investigation of metallotherapy and other phenomena associated with animal magnetism, though initial experiments appeared to confirm Charcot's claims, demonstrating that magnets could indeed induce paralysis, alter emotional states, and elicit other dramatic responses in hysterical patients. However, Binet's keen observational skills and growing skepticism prompted him to question whether these effects were genuinely physiological in origin or whether they were influenced by extraneous psychological Le magnétisme animal meticulously catalogues Binet and Fay-Ray's experiments, highlighting the methodological flaws that could account for the observed phenomena. The crux of their argument rests on the demonstration that suggestion, rather than any inherent property of magnets or metals, was the primary causal mechanism. They detail experiments in which patients exhibited the same transfers, emotional reactions, and paralyzes when presented with a counterfeit magnet crafted from wood. This observation directly negated the claim that a physical agent was necessary to induce these effects. The patient's expectations and the subtle cues inadvertently provided by the experimenters shaped their responses. The implications of Binet and Fay-Ray's findings were far-reaching. The magnétisme animal directly challenged the Salpêtrière's physiological hypothesis of hysteria. It argued that the observed symptoms were primarily the product of suggestion, expectation, and the social context of the experimental setting. This challenged the notion that hysteria was an inherent neurological condition with fixed symptoms inducible through external stimuli. It redirected the focus of psychological research from purely physiological explanations to the complex interplay between psychological and social factors. The response to Le magnétisme animal was complex. It marked Binet's explicit break with Charcot and the Salpêtrière school, a bold move that garnered both admiration and criticism within the scientific community. While some praised Binet's methodological rigour and intellectual honesty, others remained sceptical, clinging to the established neurological explanations of hysteria. Despite the initial resistance, Le magnétisme animal exerted a profound influence on the course of French psychology. It contributed significantly to the decline of the Salpêtrière school's dominance and paved the way for a more rigorous, experimental approach to the study of psychological phenomena. The direct influence of this work is apparent in Binet's subsequent research, particularly his development of the Binet-Simon intelligence scale. The creation of the scale required meticulous attention to experimental protocols to minimize the effects of suggestion and experimenter bias. The scale was administered under standardized conditions. The administrators were trained to interact with the children impartially, ensuring that their expectations would influence test performance. This methodological caution can be traced directly back to the lessons learned from Le magnétisme animal. Le magnétisme animal also impacted the broader field of experimental psychology. It served as a foundational text on experimenter bias, also known as the Rosenthal effect, named after psychologist Robert Rosenthal, who extensively studied this phenomenon. It underscored the critical importance of double-blind protocols in scientific research, when neither the experimenter nor the participant knows who is receiving a particular treatment. This approach helped to minimize the impact of suggestion and expectation on experimental outcomes. Viewed through a contemporary lens, the magnetisme animal transcended its initial focus on animal magnetism and hysteria. It emerged as a canonical example of scientific self-correction and the crucible in which the principles of modern experimental psychology were forged. Binet's willingness to challenge his own preconceived notions, to subject his experimental methods to rigorous scrutiny, and to publicly retract his earlier conclusions exemplifies the highest ideals of scientific integrity. He transformed his own theories and reformed the methodology behind psychological testing using a novel and inventive approach. Binet adopted a position where errors were regarded as invaluable learning opportunities. The legacy of le magnétisme animal continues to resonate today, reminding researchers of the ever-present need for methodological rigor and the importance of guarding against the subtle influences of suggestion and expectation in the pursuit of scientific truth.